As you might have guessed, just as there are ways for working with existing files, there's ways to work with existing directories. And whether you call them directories or folders doesn't really matter. They're the same thing. But in the .NET framework, the class is called a directory. Now, working with directories is pretty similar to working with files, except that directories can also contain other files and directories, whereas files just contain information. But there are classes for working with directories. There is, of course, the directory.exists function, which tells you whether a directory exists or not. You can also create and delete directories the same way you can with files. You can figure out what the current directory is for the application. This is the directory that the application is currently looking at, what it thinks is the current one where information will be written to or read from. And just like in other directories, they contain other things, so you can get the files and get the directories that are contained within a directory. And just like files, you can move directories around. So let's jump over to the code and exercise some of these functions so we can see how they work. Here I am in my existing dir project, and once again I've got my snippets file open. So I've scrolled it down to the existing directories part, and I'm going to just copy these first few lines right here. Okay, so this example so far isn't too different than the example we saw for the files case. Right here at the top, I've got a string variable called the path, which I'm using to figure out where the My Documents folder is. And once again, I'm using the special environment class, and I'm calling the getFolder path, which will tell me where the My Documents folder is. And just to show you that there's lots of features on here, I'm going to just hit the little dot here on special folder. And you can see there's a whole bunch of special folders I can get passed to. There's the admin tools, there's common documents. There's things like music and pictures. There's the startup directory. There's the desktop. There's a whole bunch of special paths that you can get access to. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as My Documents. This will get me the path to the My Documents folder. Then we're going to call the directory.exists function right here on line 16 to see if that directory actually exists or not. And since it's the My Documents folder, I'm pretty sure it's going to exist. So we have an if clause here that says if the directory exists, then write out to the console that it does. Otherwise, write out that it doesn't. So this is a pretty good place to start. Let's go ahead and save and run this in its current form. And you can see that the result is that the directory exists. Okay, so far so good. Let's continue on. Let's go back to the snippets and get some more code. What we're going to do now is use the getFiles function on the directory class to write out the names of the files that are in that directory. So we're going to copy, and we're going to paste that down here. Okay, so let's save, and let's take a look. So the getFiles function that you see here on line 24 returns a string array, which is why I'm declaring this string array variable called files, which will hold the result of the getFiles function. And I pass in the path, which is now the My Documents folder. Then below that, I'm using our newly discovered for each loop construct. And so I'm going to loop over all the strings in that files array. So for each string, and I'm going to call each one of those S that's in the files array, I'm going to write out to the console that I found a file plus whatever the file name is right here. Now I could use the formatting string function, but I've just chosen not to for simplicity here. So let's go ahead and build this. We can see the build succeeded, and let's run it. Looks like we found a couple of files in there. We've got a couple of contents of the directory, so that seems to be working. All right, let's hit return and go back to the code. Okay, let's move on. Now we're going to do a little bit of extra credit. Turns out that there is a class called DriveInfo, and I'm going to leave that up to you as an exercise to go onto MSDN and look up this class to see what it does. But I'm just going to do a really quick, simple experiment here. And I'm going to copy the code, and then we'll explain what it does. So just like you can work with files and directories, you can also work with disks or other storage devices that are attached to your computer. So what we're going to do here is get information about each one of the disk drives on the computer as long as it is a fixed drive. You'll notice that there are different kinds of drives when you go look up the information about this class. There are things like removable drives and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is write out that we're getting the drive information. You can see that here on line 32. Then we're going to call here on line 33 the getDrives function. And as a shorthand, we're just going to loop this inside a for each loop. So we're going to get each drive info because the getDrives function comes back with an array of drive info structures. So we're going to say for each drive info D, which is in the array that comes back from getDrives, we're going to execute the code in this loop. And we're going to ask the drive info if the drive type is equal to the drive type.fixed. And like I said earlier, there's all kinds of examples here. If I hit the period, you'll see that there's CD-ROM and fixed and network and so on and so forth. So we're just going to stick with fixed. And we're going to write out the information about each one of the fixed drives. We'll write out its name, how much free space it has, what type it is, and so on. So let's go ahead and save. Let's build. Okay, it works. And now let's run it. Okay, you can see now that we're writing out some information about not just the files, but the drive information. So we seem to have two fixed drives. One is called C:, one is called D:. They're both fixed, and they both have a lot of free space. That's how many bytes are free in each one. Okay, that's a quick example for working with directories and drives. Now let's move on and look at some more file information.